My mother-in-law made me sleep in the garage during Christmas Eve, while everyone else enjoyed holiday comforts inside. She claimed there wasn't enough space in her modest home. Nobody stood up for me, not even my husband. 6 months later, when financial trouble struck the family business, they discovered I was their new landlord. The revelation came during a tense family dinner where Marcus choked on his wine. But it was when Helen needed my signature to save her precious country club membership that she finally understood the consequences of space heaters and sleeping bags. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The December wind cut through my thin jacket as I carried my suitcase from the car to the imposing colonial-style house decorated with tasteful Christmas lights and an elegant wreath. Snow crunched beneath my boots while my breath formed small clouds in the frigid Massachusetts air. It was my first Christmas with my husband's family, and despite my anxiety, I was determined to make a good impression on the prestigious Blackwell clan. Ready? Michael squeezed my hand reassuringly as we approached the front door. His eyes, the same warm brown that had captivated me during a chance meeting at a coffee shop 2 years earlier, held a mixture of excitement and apology. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, forcing a smile despite the knot in my stomach. Michael had warned me about his mother's traditional values and high expectations, phrases I now recognized as code for her disapproval of my background. The door swung open before we could knock, revealing Helen Blackwell in all her perfectly coordinated holiday splendor. At 62, she maintained the regal posture and scrutinizing gaze that had intimidated board members throughout her career as a hospital administrator. Her silver-streaked hair was styled in an immaculate bob, and her cashmere sweater probably cost more than my monthly student loan payment. "Michael, darling," she exclaimed, embracing her son while barely acknowledging my presence. "You've finally arrived. Everyone's waiting." "Hi, Mom," Michael replied, stepping back to place his arm around my shoulders. "You remember Olivia?" Helen's smile tightened as she gave me a quick once-over. "Of course. The architect from Cincinnati, was it?" "Cleveland," I corrected gently, extending my hand. "It's nice to see you again, Mrs. Blackwell." "Helen, please," she replied, her handshake brief and limp. "Well, come in before you let all the heat out." The interior of the Blackwell home was exactly as Michael had described, traditional, immaculate, and aggressively showcasing their family's prominence in Brookfield society. Family portraits spanning generations lined the hallway, while the living room featured a perfectly decorated 12-foot Christmas tree, surrounded by meticulously wrapped presents. Michael's father, Richard, greeted us warmly from his leather armchair. A retired judge with kind eyes that contrasted with his wife's calculating gaze, he seemed genuinely pleased to see me. "Olivia, welcome to the family Christmas. How was your drive from Boston?" "Not too bad," I replied, appreciating his attempt at normalcy. The snow held off until we were almost here. "Richard, show Michael where to put their bags," Helen instructed, before turning to me with a tight smile. "Olivia, perhaps you could help in the kitchen. Charlotte's been managing alone while I greeted guests." I followed Helen through the II dining room, where an elaborate table setting awaited the holiday meal, and into a sprawling kitchen where Michael's sister Charlotte was arranging appetizers. At 35, she had inherited her mother's elegant features, but seemed to lack the permanent disapproval etched into Helen's expression. "You must be Olivia," she said, offering a genuine smile. Finally, another normal person in this house of perfectionists. "Don't let Mother hear you say that," teased a voice from the doorway. Michael's brother Marcus entered carrying an expensive bottle of wine. At 40, he embodied the Blackwell legacy: Harvard Law, partnership at a prestigious Boston firm, and marriage to Whitney, a former debutante from a family with connections to the governor. "I'm just saying what we're all thinking," Charlotte replied with a wink in my direction. Dinner that evening was my first real introduction to Blackwell family dynamics. Helen dominated the conversation, skillfully directing topics toward achievements within their social circle and thinly veiled references to family expectations. Every comment seemed designed to emphasize the gap between my background and their established legacy. Olivia, Helen began as dessert was served, Michael mentioned you work at some sort of community development firm? Urban renewal. Partners, I clarified, straightening my posture slightly. We specialize in revitalizing neglected neighborhoods through mixed-use development. I'm leading the Riverside project. It's actually been featured in several architecture journals. How charitable, Helen replied, her tone suggesting I'd announced a hobby rather than a career. It's admirable when young people take an interest in less fortunate areas. Michael interjected, Liv's firm is one of the most innovative in the region, Mom. She just won the Hayes Award for Sustainable Urban Design. The Hayes Award? Richard perked up. That's quite prestigious. Congratulations. Helen redirected smoothly. Whitney, tell everyone about Marcus's nomination for the Judiciary Committee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The conversation moved on, but Helen's dismissal of my professional accomplishments established a pattern that would continue throughout the visit. Every achievement I mentioned was minimized, every opinion gently but firmly contradicted. By the third day, I had grown accustomed to her subtle undermining, the way she would rephrase my comments as questions or direct conversations away from topics where I might demonstrate knowledge. What I wasn't prepared for was her announcement on Christmas Eve. I'm afraid we've run into a small accommodation issue, Helen announced as everyone gathered in the living room after dinner. With Whitney's parents joining us tomorrow, we're simply out of guest rooms. She paused, her gaze sliding past me to address Michael. Michael, you'll move into Marcus's old room, and Olivia. She hesitated, the pause deliberate. Would you mind terribly using the guest quarters above the garage? It's perfectly comfortable. Richard uses it as an office during the day. The room fell silent. I felt every eye turn toward me, including Michael's, which held a mixture of embarrassment and conflict rather than the immediate protest I'd expected. The garage? I repeated, certain I'd misunderstood. It's really more of a carriage house, Helen clarified, as if the terminology made the arrangement less insulting. There's a perfectly adequate sofa bed and, of course, a bathroom. We simply don't have another option with Whitney's parents arriving. I looked around the massive house, knowing full well there were at least 2 unused rooms, the library with its daybed and the ground floor study where no one had set foot since our arrival. This wasn't about space. This was about putting me in my place. Couldn't Whitney's parents use the garage room? Michael asked, finally finding his voice. Since Olivia's already settled in upstairs? Helen's expression hardened slightly. Roger has back problems. He needs a proper bed. Besides, they're in their 70s, Michael. Surely you wouldn't expect them to trek across the yard in December. But you expect Olivia to? Charlotte interjected, surprising me with her directness. It's only for 2 nights, Helen replied smoothly. And Olivia is young and healthy. I'm sure she understands. All eyes turned to me again, waiting for my response. I could feel the weight of family dynamics pressing down, Michael torn between standing up for me and challenging his mother during the sacred family Christmas, Richard uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict his wife, Marcus, and Whitney carefully studying their drinks to avoid involvement. In that moment, I had a choice. Create a scene that would confirm Helen's unspoken assessment that I didn't belong, or demonstrate the grace under pressure my grandmother had instilled in me through years of facing similar prejudice in her own. Ives? It's fine, I said quietly, meeting Helen's gaze directly. I'm sure it will be perfectly adequate." Relief washed over Michael's face, but I noted something else in his expression. A flicker of disappointment, perhaps in himself. "I'll help you move your things," he offered. "That won't be necessary," I replied, standing up. "I can manage." The converted space above the three-car garage was technically habitable, but barely. A sagging sofa bed occupied most of the main area, while a small bathroom with unreliable hot water occupied the corner. The space heater struggled against drafts from poorly sealed windows, and the thin walls did nothing to block the December wind. As I made up the sofa bed with the linens Helen had provided, noticeably older and more worn than those in the guest rooms, I thought about the building I was sleeping in and the strange turns life sometimes takes. "Everything satisfactory?" Helen appeared in the doorway, a thin smile masking her triumph. "It's fine," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Thank you for the accommodations." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my acceptance of the arrangement. "Breakfast is at 9. Don't be late. We have traditions to uphold." With that, she departed, leaving me alone in the cold room. Later that night, as I layered every piece of clothing I'd brought to combat the inadequate heating, Michael appeared with an extra blanket and shamefaced expression. "Liv, I'm so sorry," he began, sitting on the edge of the makeshift bed. I should have stood up to her. "Yes, you should have," I agreed, too cold and disappointed to soften the truth. He winced at my directness. "Mom's just set in her ways. She doesn't mean to be cruel." "Doesn't she?" I challenged quietly. "Michael, this isn't about space constraints and you know it." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "It's just 2 nights. Once Christmas is over, things will go back to normal." I studied my husband of 6 months, wondering if he truly believed what he was saying or if he was simply avoiding conflict. Either possibility troubled me. "This is normal for her, Michael. She's showing me, and everyone else, exactly where she thinks I belong in this family." "That's not—" "It is," I interrupted gently. "And what concerns me more is that you're letting her do it." His expression fell, guilt washing over his features. "What do you want me to do? Start a family? War on Christmas Eve?" "I want you to be the partner I thought I married," I replied, my voice steady despite the hurt. "The one who told me we were a team no matter what." Michael sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of my words settling between us. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to her tomorrow morning before everyone wakes up. We'll figure something else out." "Thank you," I said, though part of me wondered if it would make any difference. Helen Blackwell had made her opinion clear, and I suspected that moving me back into the house wouldn't change the underlying message. After Michael left, I wrapped myself in the extra blanket and pulled out my laptop. Sleep wasn't coming anytime soon in this cold room, so I might as well check on my latest project, a comprehensive redevelopment plan for the historic Westfield district. As I reviewed property assessments and funding proposals, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of my situation. Helen had relegated me to the garage because she saw me as beneath the Blackwell family standards, unaware that the community development work she had dismissed at dinner involved managing a portfolio of properties worth more than her entire neighborhood. What the Blackwells didn't know, what I had never found relevant to mention, was that the small architecture firm I'd founded 6 years earlier had evolved into one of the most successful urban development companies in the region. Urban Renewal. Partners wasn't a charity as Helen had assumed. It was my creation, built from the ground up with a combination of architectural innovation and financial acumen inherited from my late grandfather, who had taught me that true wealth comes from seeing value where others see only decay. While Helen thought she was putting the lowly architect from Cleveland in her place, she had inadvertently housed the owner of 17 commercial properties and 32 residential buildings in her drafty garage, including, through a recent acquisition my company had made via a holding corporation, the entire block on which the Blackwell family home stood. The next morning, Christmas Day dawned bright and cold. I woke stiff from the uncomfortable sofa bed and shivering despite the layers of clothing. The tiny bathroom's shower produced only lukewarm water, and the mirror revealed dark circles under my eyes from a restless night. Still, I dressed carefully in the red cashmere sweater and black slacks I'd planned for Christmas morning, applied minimal makeup to brighten my tired features, and headed across the snowy yard toward the main house. Whatever Helen's intentions, I would face the day with the dignity my grandmother had modeled throughout her life. Michael met me at the back door, concern evident in his expression. "How was it? Did you get any sleep?" "Not much," I admitted, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. "Did you speak with your mother?" His hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. "She was busy with breakfast preparations. I thought it might be better to wait until after the gifts and everything." Disappointment settled heavy in my stomach, but I simply nodded. Of course. The Blackwell Christmas morning unfolded with military precision, a carefully orchestrated performance of tradition and presentation. Gifts were opened in order of age, each recipient expected to display appropriate appreciation before the next person could begin. Helen presided over the proceedings like a conductor, ensuring each moment adhered to the established rhythm of Blackwell holiday conventions. My gifts to the family, carefully selected books for Richard, artisanal chocolates. For Charlotte, a rare vintage wine for Marcus and Whitney, were received with polite appreciation. From them, I received a generic scarf, Helen, a best-selling novel, Charlotte, and an expensive but impersonal candle set, Marcus and Whitney. Only Richard's gift, a beautifully illustrated book on innovative urban architecture, suggested any real thought about who I was. Michael had given me a lovely pair of sapphire earrings, selected with genuine care but safely within his mother's aesthetic approval. I'd given him a rare first edition of his favorite childhood book, wrapped with the ticket stubs from our first date, a gesture that earned a genuine smile and brief kiss that Helen subtly interrupted by announcing it was time for breakfast. Throughout the elaborate Christmas brunch, followed by the arrival of Whitney's parents, who did indeed receive the comfortable guest room with its queen-sized bed, I maintained pleasant conversation while observing the family dynamics with newfound clarity. Helen's subtle manipulations, Michael's conflict avoidance, Richard's quiet resignation, Marcus's practiced diplomacy, Charlotte's occasional rebellions, all pieces of a complex system designed to maintain Helen's control. That evening, as I prepared to spend another night in the freezing garage room, my phone rang with a call I'd been expecting. Daniel Peterson, my company's head of acquisitions, was checking in on the Westfield project timeline. "Everything's proceeding as planned," I confirmed, keeping my voice low as I paced the small room. "The final paperwork should be ready for signatures by January 15th. "Perfect," Daniel replied. "And the Brookfield holdings? Any issues with the Historical Society about the proposed renovations?" "Nothing unexpected. Once we present the preservation plans, I think they'll approve the modifications. The community center addition has already received preliminary support." "Excellent. By the way, the Parker Group called again about the Blackwell property. They're willing to increase their offer by 15% if we can expedite the timeline." I paused, looking out the window toward the main house where the Blackwell family was gathered in warm comfort, while I shivered in what was essentially an uninsulated storage room. "Tell them we're not interested in selling at this time," I replied after a moment's consideration. "We have other plans for that property." After ending the call, I sat on the edge of the sofa bed, contemplating the strange intersection of personal and professional circumstances. 6 months earlier, my company had acquired the entire historic block, including the Blackwell home, through a complex transaction involving a holding company. The Blackwells, like their neighbors, had received notice that the property had changed hands. but as they were protected by long-term lease agreements, most residents had paid little attention to the business entity listed on the paperwork. I had never intended to use this information in any personal way. Business was business, and my marriage to Michael had nothing to do with property acquisitions. But as I prepared for another uncomfortable night courtesy of Helen's calculated slight, I wondered if perhaps the universe was offering an opportunity to address the power imbalance that threatened not just my holiday comfort, but potentially the foundation of my marriage. Michael appeared at the door with another extra blanket and a portable heater he'd smuggled from the house. "It's supposed to drop below freezing tonight," he explained, plugging in the small appliance. "This should help." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative of the gesture even as I noted its inadequacy in addressing the larger issue. He sat beside me, taking my cold hands in his. "Liv, I know this isn't what you expected for our first Christmas together. I should have handled things differently." "Yes, you should have," I agreed, too exhausted for pretense. "Your mother deliberately put me out here to make a point, and you let her do it." Michael's gaze dropped to our joined hands. "She's from a different generation. She has certain ideas about—" "This isn't about generational differences," I interrupted gently. "This is about respect, Michael. Basic human respect." "I know," he admitted, finally meeting my eyes. "And I failed you. I'm sorry." His sincerity touched me, but I needed more than apologies. "We need to talk about what happens after this visit, because I won't spend the rest of our marriage being treated as an unwelcome outsider in your family." "You won't have to," he promised. "Once we're home, I'll have a serious conversation with Mom. Set some boundaries." I studied his face, wanting to believe him but recognizing the pattern of conflict avoidance that had brought us to this point. "I hope so, Michael. Because I love you, but I won't compromise my self-respect, not for your mother, and not even for you." He nodded solemnly, and I could see him struggling with the conflict between his loyalty to family traditions and his commitment to our marriage. "I understand. Things will change, I promise." After he left, I turned my attention back to my laptop, reviewing the latest architectural renderings for the community center project that would transform the abandoned factory at the edge of the Blackwell's prestigious neighborhood. The design incorporated elements of the original industrial structure while creating a modern space for education, arts, and community gatherings, a project Helen would undoubtedly oppose once it became public. As I made notes on potential modifications, I considered the strange position I found myself in. The Blackwells saw me as an outsider reaching above my station through marriage to Michael, while in reality, I controlled the very ground beneath their feet. It wasn't a power I had ever intended to wield in personal matters, but as I shivered despite the small heater's efforts, I wondered if perhaps it was time for some truths to come to light. The remainder of the Christmas visit passed in a blur of polite conversations, elaborate meals, and thinly veiled critiques from Helen. Through it all, I maintained my composure, participating in family activities while observing the dynamics with newfound clarity. Michael made small gestures of support, saving me a seat beside him at dinner, complimenting my contributions to conversations, but never directly challenged his mother's treatment of me. On our final morning, as we packed to return to Boston, Helen appeared in the garage doorway. "I hope the accommodations weren't too uncomfortable," she said, her tone suggesting I should be grateful for being included at all. "They were adequate," I replied neutrally, folding the last of my clothes into my suitcase. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with having established her dominance. "Perhaps next year, if you come again, we can make better arrangements." The conditional "if" hung in the air between us, a clear message that my place in the family remained, uncertain and subject to her approval. "Perhaps," I agreed, meeting her gaze steadily. "Though I think by next Christmas many things will have changed." Something in my tone must have registered because her eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean by that? Just that life is full of unexpected developments, I replied with a small smile. Wouldn't you agree, Helen? Before she could respond, Michael appeared to help with the luggage, and the moment passed. But as we drove away from the Blackwell estate, I made a decision that would alter the family dynamic permanently. It was time for the Blackwells to learn exactly who they had relegated to the garage. The drive back to Boston was mostly silent, both of us processing the holiday experience in our own ways. When we finally arrived at our Beacon Hill brownstone, a property I had purchased and renovated before meeting Michael, I set my suitcase down in the entryway and turned to face my husband. "We need to talk," I said simply. Michael nodded, his expression resigned. "I know, and you're right. Things can't continue this way." Over cups of hot tea in our comfortable living room, so different from the cold garage space, we had the conversation that should have happened long before the Christmas debacle. "Your mother doesn't respect me," I began, stating the obvious. "And while that's her choice, I won't accept being treated as less than anyone else in your family." "I understand," Michael replied, his voice heavy with regret. "And I should have defended you, not just at Christmas, but every time she's made those subtle digs about your background or career." "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "It's complicated, growing up in that house, with those expectations. You learn early that keeping the peace is easier than challenging. The system. My father tried for years before eventually just surrendering." "That's not a marriage, Michael. That's a dictatorship." "I know," he admitted. "And I don't want that for us. I never have. I studied my husband, the man whose kindness and intellect had drawn me to him, whose vision for our life together had seemed so aligned with my own. Then we need to make some changes, starting with complete honesty between us." "Of course," he agreed readily. "No more avoiding difficult conversations." "No," I clarified. "I mean complete honesty about who I am and what I do." His brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? I know who you are." I took a deep breath, realizing that my own tendency toward privacy had contributed to our current situation. "You know I'm an architect who works in urban development. What you don't know, what I've never fully explained, is the extent of my company and its holdings." Over the next hour, I outlined the true nature of Urban Renewal Partners, not the small community-focused design firm Michael and his family believed I worked for, but the substantial development company I had built from the ground up, now controlling properties worth millions across 3 states. "Wait," Michael interrupted as understanding dawned. "You're saying you own Urban Renewal? The whole company? Not just work there?" "I founded it 6 years ago," I confirmed. "We now employ 27 people and manage over 60 properties, with development projects in 4 cities. His expression shifted from confusion to amazement. "But why didn't you ever say anything? All those times my mother talked down about your charitable work." "I'm private about my success," I explained. "My grandmother taught me that true accomplishment doesn't need advertisement. And honestly, when we met, I enjoyed that you were interested in me for myself, not for my company or assets." Michael looked stunned, processing this new information. "So all this time when my family has been treating you like some sort of charity case who married up. I've actually been the one with the more substantial resources," I finished for him. "Yes." He shook his head in disbelief. "Liv, I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were successful, but this is—" "There's more," I continued, deciding that complete transparency was necessary. 6 months ago, my company acquired the entire historic block where your parents' house is located." The color drained from Michael's face. "You own my parents' house?" "Technically, They have a long-term lease agreement with the holding company that now owns the property, I clarified. But yes, essentially. Michael stood up and paced the room, processing this revelation. So when my mother made you sleep? In that freezing garage. She was unknowingly putting her landlord in substandard accommodations, I confirmed with a slight smile. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of his agitation. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm done being underestimated and disrespected, I replied honestly, and because our marriage needs to be built on truth if it's going to survive. Michael sat back down, his expression troubled. What are you planning to do? Evict my parents as revenge? Of course not, I assured him, hurt that he would think me capable of such pettiness. I would never use business as a weapon against your family, but I'm going to stop hiding who I am and what I've built. How? He asked warily. By inviting your family to the official announcement of our new community center project, I explained. The one that will transform the abandoned factory at the edge of their neighborhood. A project your mother has probably been complaining about since rumors of its development began. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. The mysterious developer everyone's been speculating about. That's you? I nodded. Urban Renewal Partners, working through Westfield Holdings. The plans will be unveiled at a community event next month. I'd like your family to attend. As my guests. Michael was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications of everything I'd shared. Finally, he looked up with a mixture of admiration and regret in his eyes. You know my mother is going to have a complete meltdown when she realizes who you really are. Probably, I agreed. But this isn't about humiliating her, Michael. It's about establishing truth and mutual respect. I can't keep pretending to be less than I am to protect her ego or avoid family conflict. He nodded slowly. You're right. And I'm sorry I ever put you in that position. He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. I married an extraordinary woman, and it's time my family recognized that. For the first time since our disastrous Christmas visit, I felt hope for our marriage and the possibility of a healthier relationship with the Blackwell family, one built on honesty rather than assumptions and manipulations. So, I asked, will you help me word the invitations to your family? Michael's smile held a hint of the mischief I'd fallen in love with. Absolutely, though I think we should deliver your mother's in person. I wouldn't want to miss her expression, for anything. The next day, I returned to my office for the first time since the holiday break. The sleek, modern space overlooking Boston Harbor reflected the success of Urban Renewal Partners, a far cry from the small drafting table where I'd started 6 years earlier. Daniel, my head of acquisitions, greeted me with a stack of updates on current projects. Welcome back. How was the family Christmas? Educational, I replied with a wry smile. Very educational. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't press for details. Instead, he updated me on developments during my absence, including increasing interest in our community center project. The Historical Society has given preliminary approval for the renovation plans. They're particularly impressed with the preservation of the original architectural elements. Excellent. And the timeline for the public announcement? Still, on schedule for January 15th. We've secured the venue and sent initial invitations to key community stakeholders and local officials. I nodded, making a decision. I'd like to add a few personal invitations to the list. Can you have the designer create some special versions of the announcement package? Something particularly impressive. Daniel looked intrigued, but simply made a note. Of course. How many do you need? 5, I replied, for some very important potential supporters. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael and I carefully prepared for what we had come to call the revelation. He had fully embraced the idea of finally introducing his family to the real me, though his motivation seemed to be equal parts establishing healthier family dynamics and anticipating his mother's shock. "Are you nervous?" he asked the evening, before our planned dinner with his parents. "A little," I admitted, reviewing the elegant invitation package that had been delivered that afternoon. "Not about revealing the truth, but about how it might affect your relationship with your family." Michael wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. My relationship with them, especially my mother, needed to change anyway. This is just accelerating the inevitable. The following evening, we invited Richard and Helen to dinner at Maison Laurent, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. I had chosen the venue carefully, public enough to discourage any explosive reactions, but private enough for a meaningful conversation. Helen arrived in characteristically impeccable attire, her scrutinizing gaze taking in the high-end restaurant, with approval that shifted to confusion when the maitre d' greeted me by name and escorted us to the best table in the house. "You come here often?" she asked as we were seated, surprise evident in her tone. "Olivia knows the owner," Michael explained smoothly. "They worked on a project together last year." "How fortunate," Helen replied, clearly reassessing her assumptions about my professional connections. Throughout the appetizer course, I maintained pleasant conversation while Helen subtly attempted to recalibrate her understanding of my relationship with such an exclusive establishment. Richard, perhaps more perceptive than his wife, studied me with newfound curiosity. After our main courses were served, Michael gave me a subtle nod, our agreed-upon signal that it was time. "I wanted to thank you both for including me in your family Christmas," I began, maintaining eye contact with Helen, though the accommodations were memorable. A flicker of discomfort crossed Helen's face before she composed herself. "As I mentioned, we simply had space constraints with all the family gathering." "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. "Space is valuable, especially in historic neighborhoods like yours." Richard glanced between us, sensing the underlying current in the conversation. "The house has been in Helen's family for generations. We've been fortunate to maintain it all these years." "Actually, that's part of what we wanted to discuss tonight," I continued, removing the elegant invitation from my purse. "I have something for you." I handed Helen the embossed envelope bearing the Urban Renewal Partners logo, a stylized U and R intertwined with architectural elements. "What's this?" Helen asked, examining the heavy cardstock with confusion. "An invitation to the public announcement of a project that will significantly impact your neighborhood," I explained. "I thought you should be among the first to know, given your personal connection to the development." Helen opened the envelope and removed the elaborate invitation announcing the Westfield Community Center project. Her eyes widened as she scanned the details, then narrowed as she reached the signature line where my name and title, Olivia Carter, founder and CEO, Urban Renewal Partners, was prominently displayed. "I don't understand," she said finally, looking up with confusion. "This says you're the CEO of Urban Renewal Partners." "I am," I confirmed simply. "I founded the company 6 years ago. But I thought you worked for some small community architecture firm," Helen said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "No," I corrected gently. "I own and operate one of the largest urban development companies in the region. We specialize in revitalizing historic properties while maintaining their architectural integrity and creating spaces that serve community needs." Richard was studying the invitation with increasing interest. "This is the mysterious Westfield project everyone's been talking about? The one transforming the old factory into a community center?" "Yes," I confirmed. "We're particularly proud of the design, which preserves the industrial character while creating a modern, multi-use facility." Helen was still processing, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the dawning realization that her assumptions about me had been entirely wrong. But if you're the CEO of this company, then I'm not the charity case. Architect you believed Michael married, I finished for her, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. I'm a successful business owner who happens to be passionate about urban renewal and community development. Michael reached for my hand, giving it a supportive squeeze. There's something else you should know, Mom, Dad. Urban Renewal acquired the entire historic block where your house is located about 6 months ago. The color drained from Helen's face as the full implications became clear. Are you saying you own our property? Technically, Westfield Holdings owns it, a subsidiary of my company, I clarified. Your lease agreement remains exactly as it was. This isn't about changing your living situation. It's about being honest about who I am and what I do. Richard, to his credit, recovered more quickly than his wife. Well, he said with a small laugh, I certainly didn't see this coming. Though it does explain a few things about your understanding of historical architecture when we discussed the courthouse renovation. Helen remained silent, her carefully constructed worldview visibly crumbling as she reassessed every interaction we'd had through this new lens. I want to be clear, I continued, addressing her directly. I'm not sharing this information to embarrass or threaten you. I'm sharing it because relationships built on misconceptions can't flourish. If we're going to be family, it needs to be with mutual understanding and respect. Why didn't you say something earlier? Helen finally asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. At Christmas, when I put you in the garage. Would it have made a difference? I asked genuinely. Would knowing I was successful have changed how you treated me, or would it simply have changed the reason for your disapproval? 6 months after the revelatory dinner at Maison Laurent, I found myself reviewing blueprints for the community center project in my downtown office. The spring sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating detailed architectural drawings spread across my conference table. My team had just left after our morning meeting, leaving me to contemplate how dramatically my life had changed since that frigid night in the Blackwell garage. The public announcement of the Westfield Community Center project had generated exactly the response we'd anticipated. Enthusiastic support from local officials, cautious interest from community members, and vigorous debate among the neighborhood's more conservative residents, including Helen Blackwell. My phone chimed with a text from Michael. Lunch still on for 1 Mao? Mom asked if she could join us. I smiled at the message, appreciating the subtle change it represented. Helen requesting to join us rather than expecting or demanding Michael's solo attention marked one of many small shifts in family dynamics since the revelation of my true professional identity. Of course, I replied. Reservation already includes her. The transformation in Helen's behavior hadn't happened overnight. The initial shock of discovering her garage guest was actually her landlord had given way to a complex mixture of emotions, embarrassment, resentment, and eventually, a grudging reassessment of her assumptions about me. Our first interaction, after the revelation dinner, had been predictably uncomfortable. Helen had appeared at my office unannounced a week later, her perfect posture and immaculate appearance at odds with the uncertainty in her eyes. I'd like to speak with you privately, she'd stated, standing in my reception area as my assistant hovered nearby, unsure whether to treat this visitor as family or intruder. Of course, I'd replied, leading her into my corner office with its impressive harbor view. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. Helen had remained standing, taking in the awards displayed on my walls, the architectural models of completed projects, the obvious trappings of success she'd previously dismissed or been unaware of. I've come to apologize. The words had clearly cost her considerable effort, each syllable precise and carefully measured. I made assumptions about you that were unfounded and treated you with less respect than you deserved. she continued. It was inexcusable. I gestured toward the seating area, encouraging her to sit. Thank you for saying that, Helen. I appreciate your directness. She'd settled on the edge of a chair, maintaining the perfect posture that seemed as much armor as habit. May I ask why you never corrected our misunderstanding about your position? It was a fair question, and one I'd anticipated. When Michael and I first met, he knew nothing about my company or success. He was interested in me, my ideas, my passions, my perspective, not my assets or achievements. It was refreshing, and I wanted to preserve that authenticity between us. And later, after you married? By then, patterns had been established, I'd explained. And to be honest, I was curious to see whether I could earn your respect based on who I am rather than what I own. Something shifted in Helen's expression, a flash of recognition, perhaps even respect. A test I failed rather spectacularly. We all have blind spots, I'd offered, choosing generosity over vindication. What matters is how we respond when they're revealed. That conversation had marked the beginning of a gradual recalibration in our relationship. Not immediate warmth or closeness, but a tentative movement toward mutual understanding that had continued to evolve over the subsequent months. Now, as I gathered my materials for our lunch meeting, I reflected on the unexpected outcomes of that Christmas garage banishment. What Helen had intended as a demonstration of my outsider status had inadvertently catalyzed a complete restructuring of family power dynamics and assumptions. The restaurant Helen had selected for our lunch, an upscale farm-to-table establishment near the financial district, represented another subtle shift. She now deferred to my local knowledge when making Boston arrangements, a small acknowledgement of territory and expertise. I arrived to find Michael already seated at a corner table, his expression brightening when he spotted me. 6 months into our post-revelation marriage, he had grown into a more confident version of himself, less constrained by family expectations and more openly supportive of my endeavors. Helen just called, he explained after greeting me with a kiss. She's running about 15 minutes late. Board meeting at the hospital foundation ran long. No problem, I replied, settling beside him. How's your morning been? Productive. The Eastwood brief is finally coming together. Michael's work as an environmental attorney had taken on new energy since our Christmas confrontation. His passion for conservation advocacy rekindled as he established healthier boundaries with his family. Helen arrived precisely 15 minutes later, apologizing for her tardiness with uncharacteristic sincerity. At 63, she remained an impressive figure, elegant, composed, and meticulously groomed, but subtle changes in her demeanor suggested an evolving perspective. Olivia, she greeted me with a brief touch to my shoulder, the physical contact still new and slightly awkward between us. Thank you for accommodating my schedule change. Of course, I replied easily. How was the foundation meeting? Challenging, she admitted as she took her seat. The capital campaign is falling short of projections, and the renovation timeline is non-negotiable due to regulatory requirements. Sounds familiar, I commented, recognizing the common challenges across different development projects. Have you considered phasing the renovations to align with funding milestones? Helen looked thoughtful. That might be worth exploring. The East Wing needs aren't as immediate as the surgical center updates. The conversation flowed into a surprisingly collegial discussion of project management approaches, with Michael occasionally contributing legal perspectives on compliance issues. For perhaps the first time, Helen engaged with me as a peer with relevant expertise rather than an outsider to be tolerated. After our meals arrived, Helen shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. I've been meaning to ask about the community center project. Where do things stand with the neighborhood association's concerns? The question represented significant evolution in our relationship. The Westfield Community Center had become a contentious topic in Helen's social circle, with traditional residents concerned about increased traffic and potential changes to the neighborhood character. By inquiring directly, Helen was acknowledging both my authority on the matter and the legitimacy of the development. "We've made substantial progress," I explained. "After the most recent community forum, we adjusted the parking configuration and enhanced the green space buffer along the eastern boundary. The association voted to withdraw their formal objections last week." I heard Marcus was instrumental in that negotiation, Helen noted, referencing her son's unexpected role in facilitating dialogue between my development team and the neighborhood association. "He was," I confirmed, appreciating her acknowledgement of this collaboration. His understanding of both the legal considerations and the community's historical concerns helped us find effective compromises. Marcus's involvement had been one of the more surprising developments following the Revelation dinner. Initially as skeptical as his mother about the community center project, he had gradually become intrigued by the legal complexities and eventually offered his expertise in navigating the historical preservation requirements. The preservation of the original clock tower was particularly important to several board members, Helen observed. "It's been a neighborhood landmark for generations." "That's why we made it the centerpiece of the design," I explained, pulling out my tablet to show her the latest renderings. "We're not just preserving it. We're restoring elements that were lost in the 1950s modification." Helen studied the images with genuine interest, her expression thoughtful rather than critical. "It's quite remarkable," she admitted finally. "A true blending of historical integrity with contemporary function." Coming from Helen Blackwell, longtime guardian of traditional aesthetics and neighborhood preservation, this represented extraordinary endorsement. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative of her assessment. "That balance is exactly what we've been working toward." Michael watched our exchange with barely concealed amazement, the easy professional discussion between his wife and mother, still a novel experience after years of thinly veiled tension. As we finished our meal, Helen hesitated before introducing another topic. "Richard and I have been discussing the annual family retreat at the lake house in August. We'd like to confirm that you'll both be joining us." The invitation hung in the air between us, laden with significance beyond a simple vacation request. The Blackwell Lake House retreat was hallowed family tradition, a week of carefully orchestrated activities and meals that Helen orchestrated with characteristic precision. My inclusion represented formal acknowledgement of my permanent place in the family structure. "I'd need to check my project calendar," I replied honestly. "The community center groundbreaking is scheduled for early August." "Of course," Helen nodded, surprising me with her flexibility. "Perhaps you could join us for the weekend portion if the full week isn't feasible." Charlotte mentioned she's facing similar scheduling constraints with her fellowship responsibilities. This casual accommodation of professional commitments represented another significant shift. Previously, family obligations had been presented as non-negotiable, with career considerations expected to yield to Blackwell traditions. "I'll make it work," I promised, recognizing the olive branch being extended. "Thank you for the invitation." As lunch concluded and we prepared to return to our respective offices, Helen surprised me once more. "Olivia, I wonder if you might have time next week to look at some preliminary plans the Hospital Foundation has received for the Children's Wing renovation? Your perspective would be valuable, particularly regarding the integration of the historic's facade with the modern interior requirements." The request, straightforward, professional, and acknowledging my expertise, marked perhaps the most significant evolution in our relationship to date. "I'd be happy to," I replied, genuinely pleased by the opportunity to collaborate in a meaningful way. "Just have them send the files to my office, and we can schedule a time to review them together." Helen nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant coordinate with yours." As we parted ways outside the restaurant, Helen's farewell included a brief but deliberate embrace. Still somewhat formal, but worlds away from the cold dismissal that had characterized our earlier interactions. Walking back to my office with Michael, I marveled at the transformation 6 months had wrought. That was surreal, he suggested, squeezing my hand. I kept expecting one of you to suddenly revert to form. It was actually pleasant, I admitted. Your mother is quite knowledgeable about architectural preservation when she's not busy trying to establish dominance. Michael laughed, the sound carefree in a way it rarely was when discussing his family. She's finding her way toward a new dynamic. Dad says she's been researching your projects, studying up like she's preparing for an exam. The image of Helen Blackwell diligently reviewing my professional portfolio brought a smile to my face. Trying to understand the enemy? Trying to understand the woman who upended her carefully constructed worldview, Michael corrected gently. It's not easy for her to admit she was wrong about anything, let alone something so fundamental. I never wanted to humiliate her, I noted as we paused at a crosswalk, just to establish mutual respect. I know, Michael assured me. And deep down, so does she. That's why she's making the effort now. Not from shame, but from genuine reassessment. Back at my office, I found Daniel waiting with updates on our latest acquisition, a neglected warehouse district with tremendous potential for mixed-use development. As we reviewed the preliminary assessments, my phone chimed with a message from Charlotte Blackwell. Heard you survived lunch with Mother. Miracle or strategic detente. Either way, drink soon to hear all about it. Also, Marcus mentioned you. Might need legal perspective on the riverfront zoning? Happy to connect you with my firm's commercial development team. Perks of being family, right? The message captured the evolving Blackwell family dynamic perfectly. Wry acknowledgement of past tensions, casual offers of professional support, and genuine interest in connection. Charlotte had been the first to embrace the revelation of my true professional identity, delighted by what she called the perfect karma of her mother's misjudgment. Definitely drink soon, I replied. And yes to the zoning consultation. The historical overlay is creating some interesting challenges. The interaction reminded me how thoroughly things had changed since Christmas. What had begun as Helen's attempt to put me in my place, literally and figuratively, had catalyzed a complete recalibration of family relationships and expectations. That evening, as Michael and I prepared dinner in our Beacon Hill kitchen, he broached a subject that had been percolating since our lunch with Helen. I've been thinking about the lake house invitation, he began, carefully slicing vegetables for a stir-fry. It's a significant gesture from Mom. I know, I agreed, measuring rice into the cooker. I was surprised by her flexibility about scheduling. The old Helen Blackwell would have considered anything less than full attendance as personal rejection, Michael observed. She's genuinely trying to adapt. I nodded, appreciating the effort this represented. I noticed, and I'll do my best to make the retreat work around the groundbreaking. Michael set down his knife, turning to face me directly. That's not why I brought it up. I don't want you to feel obligated to participate in Blackwell traditions that might be triggering after what happened at Christmas. His concern touched me deeply. Despite the progress in my relationship with Helen, the memory of that cold garage room remained a sensitive point. I appreciate that, I replied honestly. But I think it's important to move forward. The Lake House retreat is an opportunity to establish new patterns, not just relive old grievances. Relief washed over his features. That's how I feel too. I just wanted to make sure you weren't agreeing out of some sense of duty. I smiled, moving to wrap my arms around his waist. When have you ever known me to do anything out of mere duty? His answering laugh acknowledged the truth in my question. Fair point. You're not exactly the path of least resistance type. Definitely not, I agreed. Just ask your mother. We continued dinner preparations in comfortable conversation, discussing project deadlines, weekend plans, and the ongoing renovation of our brownstone's third floor into a combination home, office, and design studio. The easy domesticity of the evening highlighted how far we'd come since the Christmas confrontation. Our partnership stronger for having weathered the crisis and established clearer boundaries with his family. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, Michael brought up another aspect of our evolving family dynamics. Dad called this afternoon. He wants to discuss some estate planning questions with both of us. I paused in the middle of removing my earrings. Both of us? That's new. Very new, Michael agreed. Historically, family financial discussions have been strictly Blackwell blood-only affairs. The significance wasn't lost on me. Richard, Blackwell, while always more welcoming than his wife, had nevertheless maintained certain traditional boundaries around family wealth matters. Including me in estate planning conversations represented formal recognition of my permanent place in the family structure. Did he say what prompted this? Michael shook his head. Not specifically, but I suspect the revelation about your business success has made him reconsider some assumptions about financial literacy and planning. I considered this as I completed my bedtime routine. When does he want to meet? He suggested breakfast next Tuesday. Said he's retained a new estate attorney he'd like us to meet. I'll check my calendar tomorrow, I promised, sliding into bed beside him. But I should be able to make that work. Michael pulled me close, his expression thoughtful in the soft lamplight. You know what amazes me most about everything that's happened since Christmas? What's that? How gracefully you've handled it all, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. You could have used your position to exact revenge or publicly humiliate my mother. Instead, you've offered her dignity and the chance to recalibrate the relationship. I considered his perspective, reflecting on the choices I'd made since the revelation dinner. Revenge was never the goal, I explained. I just wanted to be seen accurately and treated with basic respect. Still, he insisted, many people would have enjoyed watching her squirm after the way she treated you. What would that accomplish? I asked rhetorically. Creating new resentments doesn't heal old wounds. It just ensures they continue festering. Michael studied my face in the dim light. My remarkable wife, successful developer, brilliant architect, and apparently family diplomat extraordinaire. I laughed softly at his characterization. Hardly diplomatic, just pragmatic. Life's too short for unnecessary power struggles. As I drifted toward sleep in the comfort of our home, so different from that cold garage room 6 months earlier, I reflected on the unexpected journey initiated by Helen's calculated slight. What she had intended as demonstration of my outsider status had instead catalyzed a complete restructuring of family dynamics, creating space for more authentic relationships and mutual respect. The following Tuesday, Michael and I met Richard for breakfast at his club, one of Boston's oldest and most exclusive establishments. The wood-paneled dining room with its crisp white linens and discreet service embodied the traditional values Richard had always represented within the Blackwell family structure. Solid, respectable, and unapologetically aligned with Boston's establishment institutions. Thank you both for making time, Richard greeted us, rising from his seat as we approached. His embrace included me with the same warmth he showed his son, another subtle but meaningful shift in family protocols. Of course, Dad, Michael replied as we settled at the table overlooking the public garden. You mentioned estate planning questions? Richard nodded, waiting until coffee had been poured before explaining. I've been reconsidering certain aspects of our family financial structure, specifically the management of the Blackwell Trust properties. The Blackwell Trust was a family institution, a collection of commercial and residential properties accumulated over 3 generations that provided substantial income beyond Richard's judicial pension and Helen's family inheritance. After learning about Olivia's expertise in property development and management, Richard continued, I realized we've been handling certain assets rather conservatively. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this direct acknowledgement. Most family trusts prioritize preservation over growth, I offered neutrally. It's a reasonable approach for intergenerational wealth management. To a point, Richard agreed. But after reviewing your company's performance metrics, which are quite impressive, by the way, I've been questioning whether our current management structure is unnecessarily limiting potential returns. The conversation that followed represented perhaps the most significant evolution in my relationship with the Blackwell family. Richard asked detailed, thoughtful questions about urban development strategies, property valuation approaches, and management efficiencies, engaging with me as a respected professional rather than simply his son's wife. What I'm considering, he explained as our breakfast plates were cleared, is restructuring the trust's property management approach, possibly bringing in outside expertise for certain underperforming assets. Michael glanced between us, understanding dawning in his expression. Are you thinking of having Olivia's company manage some of the trust properties? Richard nodded, his manner direct and businesslike. If she's interested. Several of our commercial holdings in the Westfield area could benefit from more innovative management approaches. The trust agreement allows for professional services contracts without changing ownership structures. The proposal caught me by surprise, not just the professional vote of confidence it represented, but the implicit acknowledgement of my permanent place in Blackwell family affairs. That's an interesting proposition, I replied carefully. I'd want to review the specific properties and current management structures before making any recommendations. Of course, Richard agreed readily. I've prepared documentation for your review. He reached into his briefcase and removed a leather portfolio containing property assessments, financial statements, and trust operational guidelines. No obligation, of course, just seeking your professional perspective. As I accepted the portfolio, the symbolism of the moment wasn't lost on me. This wasn't merely a business consultation. It was Richard Blackwell formally acknowledging my expertise and inviting my participation in one of the family's most sacred institutions. I'll review these carefully, I promised, though I should note that any formal arrangement would need appropriate disclosure and conflict of interest protocols, given the family relationship. Richard's approving nod suggested this professional boundary setting enhanced rather than diminished his respect. Precisely what I'd expect. Integrity in business dealings is non-negotiable, family or otherwise. As we concluded breakfast and prepared to head to our respective offices, Richard made one final comment that captured the extraordinary transformation of the past 6 months. You know, he said thoughtfully, when Michael first told us he was serious about you, Helen had certain concerns. I recall, I replied diplomatically, remembering Helen's thinly veiled dismay during our early encounters. What neither of us anticipated, Richard continued, was how thoroughly you would enhance not just Michael's life, but the family as a whole. Your perspective, professionally and personally, has been invaluable. The sincere acknowledgement touched me deeply, especially coming from the man who had historically deferred to his wife's judgments about family matters. Thank you, Richard, I replied simply. That means a great deal. Michael squeezed my hand under the table, his expression reflecting the significance of his father's statement. As we walked through the public garden afterward, heading toward our respective offices, Michael broke into unexpected laughter. What? I asked, puzzled by his sudden amusement. I was just thinking, he explained, about the extraordinary journey from that freezing garage at Christmas to Dad basically offering you influence over the family trust. If Mom had known where her little power play would lead. I smiled at the irony. Life does have a way of creating unexpected outcomes. The garage was her power move, Michael observed, and it completely backfired. Not completely, I corrected thoughtfully. It created necessary clarity that might have taken years to achieve otherwise. In a strange way, we should almost be grateful. Michael looked skeptical. Grateful that she treated you horribly? Grateful for the catalyst, I clarified. Sometimes it takes a crisis to break through established patterns and create space for something healthier. He considered this perspective, nodding slowly. When you put it that way, though I'm still not sure I'm ready to thank her for it. I laughed, appreciating his protective instinct. No need. The outcomes speak for themselves. And they truly did. What had begun as Helen's attempt to establish dominance through the Christmas garage banishment had instead initiated a complete recalibration of family dynamics, professional relationships, and mutual understanding. The Blackwell family lake house emerged from dense pine forest like something from a postcard, a sprawling Cape Cod-style retreat perched on a rocky promontory overlooking the crystalline waters of Lake Winnipesaukee. As Michael navigated the winding driveway, I took in the meticulously maintained grounds, the wraparound porch with its Adirondack chairs, the private dock where 2 boats gently bobbed in the afternoon sunlight. "Home sweet home," Michael said, a hint of nostalgia in his voice as he parked beside Charlotte's SUV. 35 summers and counting. "It's beautiful," I acknowledged, appreciating the property's perfect integration with its natural surroundings. Despite hearing about the lake house for years, this was my first visit. The August retreat having been scheduled during international project commitments the previous summer. "Wait until you see the sunset from the western deck," he promised, retrieving our luggage from the trunk. "Worth every minute of the drive." We had managed to arrange our schedules to join the family retreat for 4 days, arriving Friday afternoon and departing Tuesday morning. It was a compromise that had been surprisingly easy to negotiate with Helen, another indicator of the evolving family dynamics. As we approached the main entrance, the front door swung open to reveal Richard in vacation mode, khaki shorts, a faded Harvard t-shirt, and a relaxed demeanor rarely visible in his Boston persona. "You made it," he exclaimed, embracing us, both with genuine warmth. Perfect timing. Charlotte just finished setting up the traditional welcome cocktails on the back deck. The interior of the lake house reflected generations of careful curation. Comfortable furniture designed for relaxation rather than impression, walls adorned with family photographs documenting decades of summer memories, shelves filled with board games and dog-eared paperbacks. It was simultaneously grand and welcoming in a way the Brookfield home had never managed to achieve. Helen emerged from what appeared to be a sunroom, her typically formal attire replaced by linen pants and a casual blouse, her silver hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The vacation setting seemed to soften her usual rigid presentation, though her posture remained characteristically perfect. "Olivia, Michael," she greeted us, her smile more relaxed than I'd ever witnessed. "I'm so glad you could join us. I hope the drive wasn't too taxing." "Not at all," I assured her. "The route was beautiful once we got away from the city." She nodded approvingly. "Let me show you to your room so you can freshen up before joining everyone on the deck." I exchanged a quick glance with Michael, both of us silently acknowledging the significance of this moment. After the Christmas garage, banishment. Our sleeping arrangements at the lake house had been a subject of private speculation between us. Helen led us up a wide staircase to the second floor, past several closed doors, to a corner suite with expansive windows overlooking both the lake and the surrounding forest. "I thought you might appreciate the eastern exposure," she explained, opening the door to reveal a spacious bedroom with an adjoining sitting area. "The morning light here is particularly lovely for anyone who enjoys early rising." The room was clearly one of the best in the house, thoughtfully appointed with a king-sized bed, antique writing desk positioned to capture the view, and French doors leading to a private balcony. "This is gorgeous," I said sincerely, taking in the carefully considered details. Fresh flowers on the bedside table, a carafe of water with lemon slices, even architectural magazines placed on the reading table. The attached bathroom was renovated last year, Helen continued, gesturing toward a door on the far wall. Rainfall shower, heated floors. Richard insisted on modern amenities despite my concerns about maintaining the house's historical character. Perfect balance of tradition and comfort, I commented, noting how the renovation had respectfully integrated contemporary elements while preserving the room's original charm. Something shifted in Helen's expression, a flash of recognition, perhaps even appreciation for my architectural assessment. Yes, exactly. That's what we aimed for. She hesitated briefly before adding, "Take your time settling in. We'll be on the main deck whenever you're ready to join us." After she departed, Michael turned to me with raised eyebrows. "The Northeast. Sweet. That's historically been reserved for the most honored guests. Mom didn't even give this room to Marcus and Whitney until they'd been married for 5 years. I laughed, setting my weekend bag on the luggage rack. Quite a change from the garage accommodations. From the freezing garage to the premium suite in 8 months, Michael mused, testing the mattress with an appreciative nod. I'd call that progress. Significant progress, I agreed, moving to open the French doors and step onto the balcony. The view was spectacular, crystalline blue water stretching toward distant mountains, afternoon sunlight creating diamond patterns across the gentle waves. Though I suspect this is as much about Helen's self-image as it is about me. Michael joined me on the balcony, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. What do you mean? The garage incident reflected poorly on her as a hostess and family matriarch, I explained. Helen Blackwell would never want to be perceived as offering substandard accommodations to any guest, regardless of personal feelings. It contradicts her self-concept as the perfect hostess. So this is reputation management? Michael asked, sounding slightly disappointed. Partially, I acknowledged, but also genuine growth. The old Helen would have found a way to communicate my outsider status while maintaining appearances. This feels different, like she's actually trying to welcome me properly. Well, I'm just happy we're not sleeping above power tools and old paint cans, Michael quipped, kissing my temple. Ready to face the full Blackwell vacation experience? Absolutely, I replied, turning in his arms to face him. Just promise to rescue me if conversation veers toward Helen's famous detailed critiques of the neighbor's landscaping choices. No guarantees, he laughed. That's a cornerstone of Blackwell Lake House tradition. Freshened up and changed. Into vacation-appropriate attire, we made our way downstairs and through the house to the expansive back deck where the family had gathered. Charlotte immediately spotted us and waved enthusiastically, gesturing toward the empty chairs beside her. Finally, she exclaimed as we joined the group. Someone under 60 to talk to. Marcus and Whitney aren't arriving until tomorrow, and I've been drowning in retirement planning discussions for hours. At 38, Charlotte was the family rebel, unmarried by choice, dedicated to her career as a civil rights attorney, and perpetually challenging Blackwell conventions with good-humored persistence. We had formed an easy friendship since the Christmas revelation, united by our outsider perspectives on family traditions. Poor Charlotte, Michael teased, accepting a gin and tonic from his sister. Trapped with adults discussing adult things. Boring adult things, she corrected, passing me a glass of white wine. Dad's been explaining property tax assessments to Mom's cousin Beatrice for 45 minutes. I nearly threw myself off the dock in desperation. Richard overheard and chuckled good-naturedly from his position near the grill. Beatrice asked, Charlotte, tax law isn't my idea of vacation conversation either. The casual atmosphere was a revelation. The Blackwells I'd previously encountered at formal family gatherings transformed into more relaxed, authentic versions of themselves in this lakeside setting. Helen moved between conversation groups with practiced hospitality, but without the rigid control she typically exerted over social interactions. Richard tended the grill with casual expertise, occasionally interjecting humorous commentary into nearby discussions. As sunset approached, everyone naturally migrated toward the western deck where comfortable seating had been arranged to capture the spectacular view. Helen appeared beside me, offering a refill of my wine glass. "Michael mentioned you've been working on community-integrated housing concepts," she commented, settling into an adjacent chair. "I read an interesting article in Architectural Digest about similar approaches in Scandinavian developments." The direct expression of interest in my professional work, without qualification or comparison to Blackwell-approved alternatives, represented another small but significant evolution in our relationship. "Yes, we're incorporating several Nordic-inspired elements in the Riverside project," I confirmed. "Their approach to common spaces creates natural community building without sacrificing privacy." "Fascinating," Helen replied, and surprisingly, she meant it. "I'd love to see the preliminary design sometime, if you're willing to share them." "Of course," I agreed, still adjusting to this new dynamic where my professional expertise was acknowledged rather than dismissed. "I have the digital renderings on my tablet. I could show you tomorrow if you're interested." "I'd like that," she said simply, before being called away by Richard to weigh in on a grilling decision. Charlotte immediately slipped into the vacant seat, her expression amused. "Look at you, being consulted on professional matters by the great Helen Blackwell. If someone had suggested this scenario at Christmas, I'd have had them committed." I laughed, appreciating her directness. "It's certainly been an educational 8 months." "Educational?" Charlotte snorted into her wine glass. "It's been revolutionary." "Do you realize Mom actually referenced your community center design during her garden club presentation last month? As a positive example of thoughtful urban planning?" This was news to me. "She did?" "Complete with professional photographs and architectural renderings," Charlotte confirmed. "Margaret Wilson nearly fell out of her chair. Mom's been leading the Preserve Traditional Neighborhood Character crusade for decades." I processed this unexpected information as the sunset painted the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. The idea of Helen Blackwell publicly endorsing my design approach, to her carefully cultivated social circle no less, represented a level of acceptance I hadn't anticipated. "I'm not sure what to make of that," I admitted. Charlotte studied me thoughtfully. "You really don't see what you've accomplished here, do you?" "What do you mean?" "My mother has spent 63 years cultivating an image of impeccable judgment and unquestionable authority," Charlotte explained. "She doesn't change her mind, ever, and she certainly doesn't publicly reverse positions. Yet here she is, not just tolerating, but actively embracing ideas she dismissed just months ago." Put that way, the transformation was indeed remarkable. "I never set out to change her," I noted, "just to establish mutual respect." "That's probably why it worked," Charlotte observed sagely. "Mom can spot manipulation a mile away. Your authenticity disarmed her entire defensive strategy." As dinner was served at the long table on the main deck, grilled fish, seasonal vegetables, and crusty bread passed family style, despite Helen's usual preference for formal service, I observed the Blackwell family dynamics with fresh perspective. The rigid hierarchy I'd witnessed at previous gatherings had softened here, allowing more genuine interaction and spontaneous conversation. Richard shared amusing anecdotes from early days at the lake house, including several self-deprecating stories about failed sailing adventures and renovation disasters. Helen contributed memories of children's summer activities and neighborhood traditions, occasionally correcting Richard's chronology, but with affectionate teasing rather than sharp criticism. "Remember when Michael decided he could sail to Canada?" Richard laughed, passing the salad bowl. "How old were you? 12? 11, Michael corrected, grinning at the memory. "I made it almost a mile before the wind died, and Dad had to rescue me in the motorboat." "You were so determined," Helen recalled, surprising me with the warmth in her tone. "Even when we pointed out that Canada was over 100 miles away, You insisted you'd packed enough peanut butter sandwiches for the journey. This glimpse of Michael's childhood and Helen's maternal recollections offered insight into family bonds that had been invisible during our more formal interactions. Despite her controlling tendencies, Helen clearly cherished her children and their shared history. After dinner, as everyone helped clear dishes in a well-practiced routine, Helen unexpectedly approached me with a small wrapped package. "A little? Welcome tradition," she explained, offering the gift. "Everyone receives something special their first time at the lake house." Touched by the gesture, I carefully unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal with my initials, embossed on the cover. "It's lovely," I said sincerely, running my fingers over the fine craftsmanship. "I noticed you sketching building concepts during quiet moments," Helen explained. "Richard mentioned you prefer analog methods for initial ideas before moving to digital renderings." The thoughtfulness of the gift, and the fact that she had observed my working habits closely enough to select something so appropriate, caught me by surprise. "Thank you, Helen. This is perfect." A pleased expression crossed her face, not the satisfaction of social obligation fulfilled, but genuine pleasure at having chosen well. The stationery shop in the village has been in the same family for generations. They still use traditional binding techniques. The evening concluded with everyone gathering in the main living room for what was clearly another Blackwell tradition: board games by the fireplace despite the summer season. The competitive spirit I'd observed in more formal settings transformed into good-natured rivalry as teams formed for charades, with unexpected alliances crossing generational lines. Later, as Michael and I prepared for bed in our comfortable suite, I reflected on the day's revelations. "Your family is different here," I observed, braiding my hair for the night. "More authentic." Michael nodded, understanding immediately. "The lake house has always been where we could breathe. Even Mom relaxes her standards here, relatively speaking." "It makes me see all of you more clearly," I admitted, "especially Helen." "How so?" He looked genuinely curious. I considered how to articulate my observations. "In Boston, I mostly see her public persona, the impeccable society matriarch maintaining perfect control. Here, glimpses of the actual person emerge, the woman who remembered your childhood sailing adventure with genuine affection, who noticed my sketching habits and found a perfect gift." Michael smiled softly, climbing into bed beside me. "She's complicated, always has been, incredibly loving in her way, but constrained by expectations and appearances. Like the house in Brookfield," I mused. "Beautiful but formal, designed more for impression than comfort." "Exactly," he agreed, drawing me close. "While this place reflects who we actually are when no one's watching." The next morning, I woke early as sunlight streamed through the eastern windows, painting the room in golden light. Michael still slept soundly as I slipped quietly onto the balcony with coffee and the new journal, inspired to capture the peaceful lake scene in quick architectural sketches. I'd been drawing for perhaps 20 minutes when I noticed Helen on the dock below, performing what appeared to be gentle yoga stretches as the morning mist rose from the lake surface. This private glimpse of Helen Blackwell engaging in an activity she had once dismissed as California nonsense when mentioned at a family dinner offered another piece of the puzzle: the complex woman beneath the carefully maintained public image. Later that morning, as families throughout the lake community began their day's activities, Marcus and Whitney arrived with their teenage daughters in tow. The family dynamic shifted again with these additions. Marcus more relaxed away from his Boston law practice, Whitney less formal than her country club presentation suggested, and the girls bringing energetic teenage perspective to family discussions. "Aunt Olivia!" 15-year-old Emma called out, spotting me on the deck. The honorary title still felt new and slightly surprising, especially for Marcus's daughters who had initially viewed me with the same cautious assessment as their grandmother. We brought the architectural magazines you recommended, she continued, pulling several glossy publications from her backpack. Dad said you might help me with my summer project? Emma's unexpected interest in architecture had emerged during a family dinner 3 months earlier, creating another bridge between my professional world and the Blackwell family connections. What had begun as polite conversation had evolved into genuine mentorship of Marcus's scientifically minded daughter. Absolutely, I confirmed, making room for her at the deck table. What aspects are you focusing on for the project? As Emma spread out her preliminary sketches for a sustainable community center design, her summer assignment for an advanced placement environmental science course, I noticed Helen observing our interaction from the kitchen doorway. Rather than the disapproving assessment I might have expected earlier in our relationship, her expression held something closer to appreciative observation. The day unfolded with classic summer activities: swimming off the private dock, a boat excursion, around the lake, an elaborate picnic lunch on a secluded beach accessible only by water. Throughout these shared experiences, I found myself fully included in family traditions, with various Blackwells offering explanations of long-standing customs and inside jokes. The sandbar incident of '97 is legendary, Charlotte explained, as we lounged on the boat while Richard navigated familiar waters. Dad misjudged the water level after a dry spell and grounded the entire family on a sandbar for 4 hours. The sunburns were epic. The pictures were worse, Marcus added with a grin. Mom's enormous sun hat blew away and she refused to be photographed with, and I quote, disheveled hair unbecoming a Blackwell. I said no such thing, Helen protested from her position near the bow, though her tone suggested the story held at least partial truth. I simply preferred not to document that particular misadventure. She made us promise never to mention it at the yacht club, Michael Stage whispered, earning a splash of water from his mother's direction. This playful interaction, Helen participating in family teasing rather than enforcing decorum, represented yet another facet of the complex woman I was gradually coming to understand. That evening, as dinner preparations became a family affair with assigned responsibilities coordinated with military precision, Helen surprised me by requesting my assistance with the main course, rather than delegating me to simpler tasks usually assigned to newcomers. I understand you're quite skilled in the kitchen, she commented as we worked side by side preparing a complicated seafood paella. Michael mentioned you studied briefly in Barcelona? A semester abroad during college, I confirmed, expertly dicing vegetables for the sofrito base. I fell in love with Spanish architecture and cuisine simultaneously. Architecture I understand, Helen noted, monitoring the saffron-infused broth. But cooking seems an unexpected passion for someone with your professional demands. I considered how to explain the connection. They're not as different as they appear. Both require understanding how individual elements interact to create something greater than their parts. Structure, proportion, timing. The fundamentals are surprisingly similar. Helen looked thoughtful as she considered this perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. Creation through thoughtful combination. She hesitated before adding, you approach everything with such intentionality. It's rather remarkable. The observation, delivered, without qualification or comparison, felt like significant progress in our evolving relationship. Thank you, I replied simply. That's a quality I've always admired in you as well. Surprise flickered across her features before settling into something warmer. We're more alike than I initially recognized, I think. This quiet acknowledgement of connection, offered over simmering paella rather than through formal declaration, perfectly captured the subtle shift in our relationship. Not dramatic reconciliation or performative acceptance, but genuine recognition of shared qualities and values. The resulting dinner was a resounding success, with everyone complimenting the paella as one of the best in Lake House memory. Richard, raised his wine glass in appreciation. To Helen and Olivia, he toasted, proving that collaboration produces excellence. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone at the table, though no one explicitly referenced the journey from Christmas garage banishment to summer culinary partnership. Some transformations required no verbal acknowledgement to be understood by all involved. Later that evening, as younger family members organized a bonfire on the beach, Helen approached me on the deck where I was capturing the sunset in my new journal. "May I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the adjacent chair. "Of course," I replied, closing the journal to give her my full attention. She settled beside me, her gaze directed toward the spectacular sky rather than making direct eye contact, a technique I'd noticed she employed when broaching more personal topics. "I've been meaning to tell you how impressed I am with the community center project," she began. "The historical preservation elements are particularly thoughtful." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative of her professional assessment. Maintaining neighborhood character while creating new functionality was a central goal. She nodded, still watching the sunset. "The balance you've achieved is remarkable." I'll admit I was skeptical initially, but the execution has proven my concerns unfounded. Coming from Helen Blackwell, longtime neighborhood preservation advocate and frequent opponent of development projects, this represented extraordinary endorsement. "That means a great deal coming from you," I acknowledged. "Your understanding of the area's historical significance helped inform several design decisions." This was true, though perhaps not in the way Helen might interpret it. My team had thoroughly researched all previous objections to development proposals in the neighborhood, including Helen's meticulously documented preservation concerns, specifically to address potential resistance proactively. "Really?" She looked genuinely surprised and pleased by this information. "Your historical society presentations are quite thorough," I explained diplomatically. "They provided valuable context for understanding the neighborhood's evolution and significant architectural elements." Helen seemed to absorb this information with thoughtful consideration. "I've spent decades advocating for thoughtful preservation, often feeling I was shouting into the void as developers prioritized profit over heritage." "The best projects honor both," I offered. "Economic viability ensures long-term sustainability, while historical respect maintains community identity and connection." "Balance," Helen observed, echoing our earlier cooking conversation. "The essential ingredient." We sat in companionable silence for several moments, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon in a final blaze of color. When Helen spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, less certain, more reflective. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "A proper one, not the perfunctory acknowledgement I offered after the revelation." I turned to face her directly, recognizing the significance of this moment. "I'm listening." "My behavior at Christmas was inexcusable," she continued, finally meeting my gaze. "Not just the garage accommodation, which was deliberately unkind, but the general pattern of dismissal and judgment I directed toward you from the beginning." The directness of her acknowledgement surprised me. I had expected Helen Blackwell to maintain plausible deniability about her intentions, perhaps reframing the garage incident as unfortunate necessity rather than calculated slight. "What you may not understand," she continued when I remained silent, "is that my behavior had very little to do with you specifically. It reflected my own insecurities and fears about changing family dynamics." "I suspected as much," I acknowledged, gently. She raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Did you?" "Change is threatening when identity is strongly tied to established roles and relationships," I observed. "Your position as family matriarch and arbiter of Blackwell standards was challenged by Michael's choice of a partner outside your social circle." Helen's expression suggested this assessment had struck home. "You're quite perceptive." "I've had similar experiences from the opposite perspective," I explained. Being underestimated based on assumptions rather than reality is unfortunately familiar territory. Yet you never responded with bitterness or retaliation, Helen noted, even when presented with the perfect opportunity after the revelation. I considered how to explain my approach. Retaliation perpetuates cycles that benefit no one. Breaking patterns requires someone choosing a different response. Like designing a community center that addresses preservation concerns, rather than dismissing them, Helen suggested, making a connection that surprised me with its insight. Exactly, I agreed. Opposition often contains valuable perspective when we're willing to listen past the initial resistance. Helen was quiet for a moment, absorbing this framework. I wish I had recognized your wisdom earlier, she finally said. We've lost valuable time to misunderstanding. We have the present, I reminded her, and hopefully many future lake house visits to continue building understanding. Her smile held genuine warmth, perhaps the first completely unguarded expression I'd witnessed from Helen Blackwell. I would like that very much. As family members began migrating toward the beach bonfire, visible now as a glowing point in the gathering darkness, Helen rose from her chair with characteristic grace. Shall we join the others? She suggested, extending her hand in a gesture that symbolized far more than simple assistance. Taking her offered hand, I rose to stand beside her, not as reluctant daughter-in-law or strategic adversary, but as respected family member and, perhaps eventually, friend. Lead the way, I replied, ready to join the Blackwell family tradition. With my place now firmly established through understanding rather than accommodation. Together we walked toward the light of the bonfire, our shadows merging into one as we left the deck, a visual representation of the bridge we had finally begun to build between our different worlds and perspectives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.